Good morning. I want to begin with a poem by David White. I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequences of your love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. I'll come back to that. We take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And I think many people know the chant, and so I'd like to formally begin the talk with that chant. Buddham Saranam, and invite you to join me. Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham Saranam Gacchami. I go for refuge to the Buddha. I go for refuge to the Dharma. I go for refuge to the Sangha. We are refugees. There's no place to hide. The only place that we find refuge, that we find a home, a safe place, is in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Buddha was a person who lived 2,500 years ago, and the term Buddha means awake. And so we take refuge in that person, and we take refuge in the state of being awake that he taught us. Dharma means teaching, or sometimes law, and Dharma means phenomena. So we take refuge both in the Buddhist teaching and the guidance he gave us, and in the way the universe is, in everything around us and everything that supports us, whether it looks like support or not. Sangha is the community. Originally, classically, there was the fourfold Sangha: monks, nuns, laymen, laywomen. Sometime later, Sangha was just the monastic community. And Sangha is also the community of all life, all beings, which is a little like taking refuge in all phenomena. So this matter of being a refugee, we're pretty familiar with it right now, because not only are there a lot of refugees, but we see and hear about them on the news. I know people who've had to leave their homes from wildfires, and then they go back. I've met people who left New Orleans and never went back. We are constantly hearing about refugees fleeing wars, gangs, drought, starvation. and coming to other countries who sometimes do and sometimes do not welcome them in. Our country has not been welcoming them very well. Norway and Germany, I think, have been welcoming them. But the matter of refugees and the matter of creating refugees in this very physical sense is a problem even more of our time than it has been at other times. A lot of the early people who came from Europe to the Americas were refugees from starvation and from oppression in a way that we tend to only be vaguely familiar with. That's apart from the ones who came as slaves, of course. So there's actually no place to hide. There's no physical refuge. You know, I deliberately moved back to Minnesota because I thought it would be one of the safest places for climate change. And it was looking pretty good. And then the tornado ripped through my woods. And it was still looking pretty good, you know. I mean, that's definitely a first world problem. But I also know that there's not really safety. There's no such thing as physical safety. And so in Buddhism, we take refuge from our own minds. We take refuge from the three poisons: greed, hate, and self-delusion. And the root of these is self-delusion. It's the fantasy that we are separate beings, that we create ourselves, and that we last, that we could be permanent. So if something is independent and permanent, then it can also be annihilated. A lot of people, upon hearing the basic Buddhist teaching, maybe it's only a Mahayana teaching, the term emptiness, but they hear that teaching and they think we're talking about nihilism. But if you don't have a permanent existence, you don't have annihilation, and you cannot be destroyed. We are created every moment by everything around us and by everyone around us. And so Buddhism gives us freedom from that bit of fear. There's, of course, physically everyone dies eventually. But that idea of being wiped out, of being made zero, that belongs to the illusion of a separate self. In the Aryapariyasana Sutta, which means seeking the supreme state of sublime peace, the Buddha said, "Monks, there are these two kinds of search, the noble search and the ignoble search. And what is the ignoble search? Here, someone being himself subject to birth seeks what is also subject to birth. Being himself subject to aging, he seeks what is also subject to aging, and so forth, through sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement. And what is the noble search? Here, someone being himself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, seeks the unborn supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Being himself subject to aging, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, he seeks the unaging supreme security from bondage, nibbana. I considered this thus: why, being myself subject to birth, do I seek what is also subject to birth? Why, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, do I seek what is also subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement? Suppose that, being myself subject to birth, having understood the danger in what is subject to birth, I seek the unborn, supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Suppose that, being myself subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, having understood the danger in what is subject to aging, sickness, death, sorrow, and defilement, I seek the unaging, unailing, deathless, sorrowless, and undefiled supreme security from bondage, nibbana. Nibbana means blown out, and thus non-Buddhists or sometimes beginners think that they're talking about blowing out the personal self. But nibbana actually refers to the blowing out of the flames that cause suffering, of reaching a place that is cool and calm. Refuge. So it's almost 2 months ago now that I had a trip to the emergency room. I don't usually see doctors. I don't have health insurance. My identity, the person I think I am, I had thought that my lifestyle protected me and my use of alternative health and some good hereditary factors. And it turned out, suddenly I wasn't so sure. You know, our bodies are impermanent, temporary, created by the things around us. No refuge, no escape. I could have died. I went there because it was just barely possible that I might be having a heart attack. And I was not in favor of the consequences of that. Buddhism would not have stopped me from either dying or of developing a permanent health problem. What Buddhism does do for me is it addresses my idea. It reminds me that actually I'm not in control of everything about my body. It addresses that what I'm able to do and what I'm subject to is not always what I think it is, that I am not in control. And so, coming back to David White's poem, I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequences of your love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. When the Buddha, as a young man, went out of his palace together with Chandra, his charioteer, he went to see the real world outside the palace. He had been very protected. This was clearly a poor decision on his father's part. He should have known that sooner or later, his son would see how things were in the real world. So he saw death, he saw old age, he saw sickness. And when he asked about these strange things that he had never seen before, Chandra said, "Oh yeah, this is that. It happens to everyone. It happens to you and me too. There is no escape from the factors of life." And then he saw, sometimes called a holy man, someone who had left the householder life and was seeking the ultimate. And he was inspired that that's what he would do. And the question that he had is, how can we be free from suffering? It was not how can we end suffering, it was how can we be free from it. And if you look at the Four Noble Truths, and he discusses suffering, he says, well, being sick, I'm not going to remember all of them. Being near things we don't like, being away from people we love. There are all kinds of very mundane things that are included in what we call suffering. And the angle of approach for freedom is that we stop prioritizing those things, that we seek for something else. That our desire is not about comfort, food, good friends, but that our desire is for freedom for ourselves and others. So this happened. The Buddha he's referred to as a prince. He was at least a chieftain. His people were a tribe, the Sakya clan. Shakya clan. And he had a very comfortable life. And I'm sure that in his tribe, there were poor people, sick people, old people. I'm sure there was hunger and oppression, although it seems to have been a relatively healthy and harmonious kind of community. All he had to do was leave the palace walls, and he saw that there was something else going on that he hadn't understood. There's something I want to say about that culture. It's the descriptions I've read of it remind me of the descriptions of Ladakh, or of Tibet before the Chinese came. Spiritually oriented, relatively egalitarian, relatively communal. And things are possible in a culture like that are not so easy in a culture with warriors and kings and rulers. Certainly, it's very difficult in our culture, and there are presumably places where it's harder. But there's something, this freedom from suffering. I want to refer to a meal chant that we have in the Zen tradition. So when we have a formal meal in the Zendo with chanting, and it's a very beautiful event. And one of the chants goes like this in the translation that I first learned. Innumerable labors have brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. As we desire the natural condition of mind to be free from suffering, we must be free from greed. To support our life, we take this food. To attain the Buddha way, we take this food. We offer this food to all beings. Oh, this food is for the three treasures, for our parents, teachers, leaders, and homeland, and for all beings in the six realms. We eat this food with everyone, and so forth. But the natural condition of mind caught my attention immediately. I was raised in a Christian church in which it was considered that the natural condition of mind was greedy, sinful, selfish, and hateful. And that, we would be freed by our faith and our practice of religion. But here in Buddhism, we see the natural condition of mind as being free, open, comfortable, relaxed, free from clinging. And to me, that is a fundamentally radical aspect of Buddhism. Our basic nature is not the three poisons. Our basic nature is free. Actually, to use the term our basic nature is to lie. So I'll apologize for that. We are created by everything around us. And so what's the nature of the universe? Well, it's really just there. It's just there, and things happen. And the practice of Buddhism, to me, includes regarding those things around us that are just happening, that are creating me, interpreting them as support. I mean, they do create us. But the attitude that says, this is a blessing, this supports me, this takes care of me. For me, that's the core meaning of Buddhism, and it's also a core gift that Buddhism has to give to the world. So when we talk about freedom from suffering, we're not saying that we'll never lose someone we love or that we'll never be injured. I mean, the Buddha himself died from poisoned pork. And for centuries after that, people have argued about whether he actually ate meat, which they think is forbidden. But, you know, he got a stomach ache and then he died. So it's not that nothing bad happens. It's not even that we don't have negative emotions. What it is that there's something larger than this person. And that larger thing than this person, it includes, I would say all life, but I have to say, I'm including molecules, atoms, minerals, rocks, mountains, you know. When I say all life, I mean all those things. And then if I have to, you know, I have to clarify words. This point of consciousness looking out at the world is just one set of eyes, ears, and so forth on a very large thing. It's like the difference between a pond and an ocean. The ocean still has waves. There are ripples. You throw a stone into a pond and you can watch the ripples. You throw a stone into the ocean and it's just like the ripples are not, they're minimal. A shallow lake, like Lake Erie where I grew up on, has big waves. A deep lake, like Lake Superior, has faint waves, unless, you know, big storm, all that. That large place, that deep place, that's refuge. There's a stillness that's accessible to us. And of course, we reach it in particular when we sit, but also when we live mindfully. And also when we practice gratitude and love, all of the Brahma Viharas. So I have another poem. And this poem responds to or describes suffering and a response to suffering. The response in which the universe, all things around us, come and support us. So this is by John O'Donohue, and it's called Blessings. On the day when the weight deadens on your shoulders and you stumble, may the clay dance to balance you. And when your eyes freeze behind the gray window and the ghost of lost gets into you, may a flock of colors, indigo, red, green, and azure blue, come to awaken in you a meadow of delight. When the canvas frays in the currach of thought, and a stain of ocean blackens beneath you, may there come across the waters a path of yellow moonlight to bring you safely home. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the ocean be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. With every difficulty, with every bit of suffering that he brings up, the support of the other beings of the universe. Everything. We don't go somewhere else. Refuge does not mean going somewhere else. Refuge means letting in what is there. There's an idea about enlightenment. The idea is that enlightenment will help us, that we'll be more calm, that we won't feel pain, or that, at least that we won't feel suffering. And all of this is based in the idea that there's somewhere else to go, which is a fundamentally deluded idea. Refuge is right here. There's a whole discussion of where this idea came from historically and culturally, in the transition from hunter-gatherers to pastoralists, agriculturalists, and so forth. I think I will not go into that, but I can be asked about it. But I think that our present attention in sitting and also in mindfulness in everyday life goes back to the earliest condition of humans that we know, which is you're present, you're alert, and that's it. And the world is friendly. People have managed to experience the world as friendly in deserts, in really difficult situations. They've gone, oh, well, I know how to find food. I know how to find water. And of course, people from our culture, which is based in scarcity and fear, have studied those people who are based in abundance, even when they just had enough to get by. The Buddha, on his awakening, saw the morning star and said, "O house builder, I see you now. Your rafter is broken, your ridgepole too. You shall not build this house again." And that house, one way to see it is the house of the ego, this who I think I am. When we're freed from this idea of who I think I am, the whole joy, and beauty of being lived by all beings comes into us. There's a second definition of that house, which I ran across recently. And that second definition is God, the holy, the sacred. What if we didn't build that house either? You know, and I say that, and I'm wearing religious robes, sitting next to an altar, and there are a lot of ceremonies that I have in my life that have to do with the sacred. It's a beautiful concept. And yet, what if everything, what if instead of going somewhere else, setting something aside, what if everything around me is my refuge? So here's this other version of the refuges. I take refuge in Buddha, together with all beings, embodying the great way, vowing to awaken. I take refuge in Dharma, together with all beings, deeply entering the merciful ocean of Buddha's way. I take refuge in Sangha, together with all beings, bringing harmony to everyone, free from hindrance. We don't need anything extra. We don't need to go somewhere. Right here, all the time, is a refuge. I said once, we're safe whether we live or die. And of course, somebody asked me about that. But I'll just say it again and see if somebody asks me about it. I think I'll stop here and invite questions or comments.
Thank you, Shodo. That was really beautiful. Everything that you said. I'm really curious to learn that prayer that you do when you eat again. So I don't know if you could share it now or send it via email or something. It's just I really liked what you shared and would like to do it as well.
Oh, yeah. Let me see. I could say it again. I think I could say the whole set of things.
Yeah.
I might miss. And then I can find it and email it, but that would take a minute. Okay, so we begin. Let me see. Oh dear. Buddha was born in Kapilavastu, enlightened at Magadha, taught at Varanasi, entered nirvana at Kusinagara. Now we open Buddha Tathagata's eating bowls. May donor, receiver, and offering all be free from self-clinging with all sentient beings. So we begin by announcing Buddha's life and saying, may donor, that will be a layperson who gave the food, probably traditional as you know.
Mm-hmm.
May donor, receiver, that's us, and offering, the thing that we're about to eat. May we all be free from self-clinging. Then we recite the names of Buddha. Then we open our bowls. They're wrapped up in a cloth, and we set them out. Oh, and during that first one, a food offering is brought to the altar. So food is offered to Buddha. And it's real food, but it's a symbolic amount. Let me see. With all sentient beings, let us recite the names of Buddha. Vairochana Buddha, pure Dharmakaya. Lochana Buddha, complete Sambhogakaya. Shakya Muni Buddha, myriad Nirmanakaya. All Buddhas throughout space and time. Okay, I lost it. I haven't been doing this very long. So then we have the great bodhisattvas, Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, and Samantabhadra, who is the bodhisattva of action. Then we have the Lotus Sutra, which is interesting. It's one of the core Mahayana texts. Then we go all Buddha. I'm sorry. And while these names are being chanted, the food is served. There are servers, and people bow to each other, and everything is silent except for the chanting. And then the one just before we start eating is this one that I said. And so I gave you the old translation, which I like better than the new translation. So let's see. Innumerable labors have brought us this food. We should know how it comes to us. As we receive this offering, we should consider whether our virtue and practice deserve it. As we desire the natural condition of mind to be free from clinging, we must be free from greed. To support our life, we take this food. To attain the Buddha way, we take this food. We offer this food to benefit all beings. We offer this food to the three treasures, for our parents, teachers, leaders, and homeland, and for all beings in the six worlds. Thus we eat this food with everyone. We eat to end all evil, to practice good, to save all sentient beings, and to accomplish the Buddha way. After eating, so we wash our bowls right there in the zendo. They bring around hot water. And we say, this water with which I wash my bowls tastes like ambrosia. I offer it to the many beings to satisfy them. Om Kurasai Svaha. And we pour the water, and everybody packs up their bowls and puts them back at their seat, back by the wall. And right at the end, oh dear.
Well, I took some notes.
Yeah.
So thank you. It's a really beautiful practice.
Yeah.
And if you do find I couldn't write that fast. So if you do find it, just feel free to send it.
Yeah, I can find it, and I guess I can send it to the Sangha email address. And I'll probably find the more modern one, which is, I think it's slightly less poetic, and it's probably more comprehensible. And they took out the places where it said should. Anyway, at my very first sesshin, when you're not supposed to read or write anything, or lie down, or take a nap, the rules, when I started, the rules were pretty strict. I was sneaking into the zendo and looking in the chant book to see those words. That's how much it moved me.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you again, Shodo.
Thanks for asking that. Anything else?
Shodo, there was something you said I don't actually remember the context, but I remember the words that one should be present, alert, and the world is a friendly place. And that kind of captures what I'm doing right now with my practice, is I'm looking more at open awareness as opposed to object meditation, so kind of non-meditation, and thinking a lot about the goodness, our essential goodness. So those are really, I'm going to write those words down because that was helpful for me. It's almost a little bit like a mantra, as a good way to just kind of capture and remember what I'm doing right now, currently, with my practice.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I will say, so in the process of working on my book, I've been reading tons of stuff. And there are 2 or 3 books in particular. One of them is Rebecca Solnit's A Paradise Built in Hell. But there's another one called Humankind, in which basically the author debunks the stories that we've been told to convince us that human beings are evil. Or sometimes they convince us that civilized human beings are evil. Lord of the Flies was not a description of human nature. The Stanford prison experiment was a fraud. What's the other one? The terrible one where people administered electric shocks to people, that was a fraud. Most of the things that have been said to us to prove that we are fundamentally evil and we need somebody to control us are not true. So I'm feeling, and I've always, except for mosquitoes, I've always thought the natural world was friendly. But of course, clearly I lie. But thinking that the core human nature is not as we've been told is giving me great encouragement. So, okay. One more.
Well, that's really interesting. Just to follow up, maybe making a distinction between the core of human nature and the pervasiveness of greed and anger and delusion. Could you say something about that?
I could. I'm still trying to get it. The book I'm reading right now discusses medieval Europe and the transition from what I was taught as the Dark Ages, when they had so many holy days that people only worked half the time and people had enough to eat and women had dignity, into the period of the witch burnings and the enslavement and the impoverishment of the populace. And the author of this book, it's called Caliban and the Witch, every now and then makes an analogy to what's happening in our lives now. But mostly it's kind of obvious. And it's like, ooh, somebody told me recently that when they burned witches, they forced the young boys to watch. I haven't run across that yet. But there was lots of forcing. And so how did those people get to be that way? The book by Morris Berman goes back earlier to the transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. And that's the part I didn't go into because I thought this goes on forever. But if you can always find some food, at worst you'll find some tomorrow, versus you have to put aside food and save it all winter. And there's a king who will dole it out or prevent you from getting it. And there's somebody who will take 2/3 of your harvest and, beat you, imprison you, shoot you or something if you don't cooperate. So delayed return. So the present moment is not wonderful. Something in that transition looks to me like the source. I'm looking for the source of that. And of course, the Bible gives us one story about the source, wanting to be like gods. That's what made people do all this other stuff. They were thrown out of the garden. They were forced to do agriculture instead of just, foraging. And a lot of negative things happened. A lot. I think I probably shouldn't go further. This is a thing that I'm studying madly.
I just wanted to say something about this idea of being thrown out of the garden or being returned to paradise at death if you're blessed by God with salvation. And, the belief that the good stuff happened or will happen somewhere else and not here. And that here is a kind of treacherous, painful, like walking across a minefield journey. And but the good stuff will happen, elsewhere. And what you're describing as refuge is the opposite of that belief.
Thank you. Yeah. And, for me in my life, it's pretty easy for me to say that. I mean, I have had suffering, but, I have not, for instance, had all my children sold into slavery. I have never been whipped. I don't think I've even ever been beat up physically. I think I would remember that. And so the things, and I've never been seriously hungry. I've fasted, but that doesn't count. And so it's a kind of, it's an assertion that I make very cautiously because I don't dare to make it without considering all the people for whom life is really, really hard. And sometimes life is hard and it's not caused by other human beings. Most of the ones we know are caused by other human beings, including overpopulation. The loss of women's right over their own fertility was deliberate for the purpose of having more workers. And that, I was just reading this last night. So I better not say too much, but I just read a lot of descriptions of exactly this change and this change and this change and this change. And a woman who had an abortion or killed her baby was more likely to be executed than a woman who was accused of being a witch. I was surprised. So, yeah. So our overpopulation status was done for somebody's power and greed. And how did they get that way? I haven't seen that yet. Thank you all for coming and for listening. And well,
thank you so much, Shodo. So much wisdom, and all sorts of things we could discuss and comment. And maybe this is a wonderful lead-in for engaged Buddhism. It is where we are engaged with the world, and you've taught us a wonderful perspective. Thank you so much.